or we're talking Cup Series at Gateway. Two quick things. One, it's beginning of the month, so if you'd like to support Pearce, support myself, you can join the Patreon in the link in the description below. Secondly, it's very interesting how NASCAR has really had a ripple effect over the choices they've made up until this year when this car came out, and then what this car is changing for the future. Like, for example, short tracks and stuff, used to be good racing and stuff. Now it's not. Phoenix is terrible. Richmond is terrible. Martinsville is terrible. However, for fantasy, it's very good because we don't see a lot of wrecks. We're not seeing a lot of wrecks. We're not seeing guys be able to pass on the long run. We're not being able to see passing in the race. That's great for fantasy. If you can nail whoever leads, and if you can nail who's the fastest on the racetrack, which is really decided by who's fast on pit road, you got a good chance there. Outside of the short tracks, now we got intermediates actually racing well, but before this year's car came out, NASCAR wanted to get away from intermediates because there was too many of them. Now, I think Chicagoland would put on a great show. I think Kentucky would put on a great show. I think the original Texas would put on a great show. But it's crazy that we're catching up to choices made based on previous cars, and now we're at points to where those decisions aren't working. Like entering this week at Gateway, I think this is going to really put on a bad show for the race fans. Gateway has worked really hard to get this Cup date, and as soon as they get it with, ironically, the car that is probably going to put on the worst show at Gateway possible. The truck race should be at least somewhat entertaining, but even when you look at the truck race, you can't really pass there. The guy pulls away. And so when we're looking at the Cup Series race this weekend at Gateway, and I like that that DraftKings has finally kind of bumped up Ross Chastain to the top, but he's not entirely there. But when we look at the guys who ran well and ran up front, specifically at Richmond and Martinsville and Phoenix, it was decided on pit road. When you compare Martinsville and Richmond side by side, the top dog between those two races were Byron. Basically the third best car at Richmond, first best car at Martinsville. I think Byron is going to be a great play. I think Chase Elliott is going to be a great play as well, because I believe that he's going to get the lead at some point or get in the top 5 based on pit road. Very similar to last weekend in the Coca-Cola 600. And I said in the live show that, hey, Elliott, why he doesn't average, like he's not the best pit crew, and you could look, he's around 4th, 5th best fastest, but he averages, one fastest pit stop of each race pretty much. And that's what we saw at the Coca-Cola 600. I believe Elliott went from, running 5th or 6th. He has that fast pit stop, gets the lead, and so I think Byron Byron falls in that same category. Chase Elliott, Ross Chastain, Kyle Busch, and Denny Hamlin. Those are the guys that I also want to look at towards being fast on pit road, getting this lead on pit road, and who have been fast and who are most likely going to run in the top 6 at Gateway this weekend. When we look at Phoenix, who won that race, who was dominant at that race, it was Chase Briscoe, not because he had the fastest car, but because he had the fastest pit crew and nobody could pass him. I fully believe we're going to run into a situation like that because Gateway is going to be very difficult to pass on, especially with how we've seen these cars perform at places like Richmond, at places like Phoenix already this year. There's not going to be much passing at all. It's going to be primarily based on pit road, and so leaning towards Gateway this weekend, I'm looking at the pit strategy. I'm looking at how fast these guys are on pit road. I think that's the way we really should, charge towards this race. And so when we're looking at when we're looking at pit stops this year, let me bring this up. I was going to put this on the screen, but I don't necessarily want to because, like I said, it's early in the month. I'd like you to come and join, support us, and look at this pit data for yourself. For those of you that do have access to the sheet, when we look at top 10 when we go to the top 10 stops sheet, I primarily want to look at that one, the top 20 stops. You can look at rankings as well and have a general idea of who's being up front in these races. Who are the teams that are showing up and having, at least consistent pit stops. That's why I actually do like looking at the top 20 stops, because when you look at top 10, you get guys thrown in there. Austin Dillon, Eric Almirola, Brad Keselowski, where when you're looking at the top 20, I think it removes more of those not outlier performances, and certainly not an outlier performance like, from Elliott, from Denny Hamlin. I mean, those guys are going to have fast pit stops. But when you look at, like randomly, like Keselowski having two, top 10 pit stops at Dover, it kind of sways and leans more towards, highlighting outlander performances based on guys who are running mid-pack. Whereas when you look at top 20, it more or less averages out who has the best cars in these races. And for me, it really goes back to trying to hammer in William Byron, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch for this race, for guys having consistent pit stops. And even when you're looking at top 20, Harvick had 4 top 20 pit stops in this race at the Coca-Cola 600, and it kind of bumps him up the ranking, system here, to whereas I just kind of want to look at guys in general of who's performing, who's having consistent, top 20 stops, and who's carrying that consistently, and recently, when we're looking recently, it's Truex Jr., it's Kyle Busch, it's Chase Elliott. Those are the guys that I think are going to be up there. And when we look specifically at Richmond, that was a Toyota type of deal. That was a Toyota type of race. When we look at Martinsville, it was, let me click over this stuff here. Who was up front in Martinsville? It was William Byron. I believe Joey Logano started up front in that race. Blaney ran up front as well. I think they qualified better than the Toyotas in this race, because you had, Bell basically having the 8th fastest car, Kyle Busch having the 11th fastest car, even Chastain having the 10th fastest car at Richmond. The reason I'm bringing this up now, or the reason I'm segueing into this, is because qualifying is going to be huge for this race. I mean, it always is, but I really do believe that when we look at the qualifying times, front, let's say front 3 rows, I fully believe the majority of the lap leaders are going to be coming from that area, because it's going to be so hard. It's going to be difficult to pass. And difficult. That's another thing, really quick. Like, are you guys blind? Not you guys listening, but NASCAR. Like, there's clear dirty air from this car. What the hell are we talking about? Being like, this is the best car ever. There's no dirty air. What are you talking about? Kyle Busch spinning out at a turn 2 last weekend shows where the dirty air is at this track. Same thing when he was trying to pass Hamlin late in the race at the Coca-Cola 600. There's dirty air in this car. And it's not directly behind the car, but it's up. It's slightly higher. You have to shoot under the dirty air in this car. Like, can we just agree to get rid of the diffuser, and we might actually have like a really, really nice car to race with? When we look at Phoenix, the reason why we didn't have guys passing was because you can't get underneath the dirty air. You're just stuck in that. Richmond, all the passing happened during the green flag pit stops. That's how it is. Guys shooting, or guys shorting the pit stops, or not shorting. What is it called? That is a blank. But you know what I mean. When you pit earlier, that's how you're gaining speed. That's how you're gaining positions. Martinsville, A lot of people are like, "Wow, that was a terrible Martinsville race." Yeah, but for fantasy, let's take away and look at the similarities that we've seen from Phoenix, Martinsville, and Richmond. You cannot pass under green here. So qualifying is going to be huge. I primarily want to look at, the qualifying grid. I understand we're going to lose some good cars that are going to be starting, between 11th and 14th, just because they don't get into the final round of qualifying. That's how it's always going to be. And so we might look at those 4 grid places as, as a guy who can at least maybe get 5x, especially if it's a guy like, Logano, Bowman, Harvick, Suarez, whatever the case is. Like, if you have a lot of 8K guys, or maybe having like 8 or low 9K guys, 11th to 14th or 15th, I think they can realistically get 4.95x, and you might necessarily need that. But when we're looking primarily at the lap leader in these races, I think it's coming from the first 3 rows. I don't necessarily like just staring at race and reference, because I believe that it gives people not you guys, like a bad, entry of like, we got to use race and reference to do stuff. But I want to show you what I mean, and why I'm focusing on the practice data so much, or not practice data, but the way that these races have played out and really being determined by pit road. And the reason why I want to focus on guys starting up front in this race, like to at least be the initial lap leader, is because that's what we're seeing. And we're typically seeing the pole sitter. And so we've had, Ryan Blaney start first at Phoenix, be the initial lap leader. When we look at Richmond, we had Blaney start first again, be the initial lap leader. When we look specifically at Martinsville, it was Elliott. He was the initial lap leader. And then when you compare that to how these races are finishing, let me just make sure I have this lined up here. When we get to, let's use Martinsville for the most recent one. And when we're looking at the finishing for Richmond, Byron, Logano, how did Dillon get up there? What is Blaney doing there? Chastain, okay. Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch. And then we look specifically at the pit data from Martinsville, which you can get if you go to our Patreon. You can look through, and we have every other race. We have other tabs as well. When I was mentioning the top 10 pit stops, top 20, we have tons of stuff here. But let's look specifically at Martinsville, Cindric, and this is just looking at averages. I'm not going to go around and look down through the other stuff that we have. I just wanted to use the averages here, okay? And there's a lot of good data in here that you can look down and see why guys are doing well at certain points in the race. You can scroll through and look at other things. I just want to look at the average here. We're not diving into too much, but we're diving in enough to see. So let's see. Cindric, where'd Cindric finish? Cindric, 11th. Okay, we're not nailing it right here. Byron, the main leader, where did he perform? Second best on averages. When we look at Blaney, second on averages, finished 4th. When we look at Kyle Busch, I believe he finishes 8th here, finishes 7th. When we're looking at Austin Dillon, why is Austin Dillon finishing 3rd? This is way out of line for Austin Dillon. Why is he finishing here? Because of how he performed on pit road. And you can look at the same thing here. Like when we look at Eric Almirola, where did he come from? Based on pit road. These are guys that are... The guys who are fast on pit road are determining who's being up front late in this race. And when we're looking specifically at these 3 races that we're looking, sure, Phoenix had, 3 lap leaders when you really look at it. But in the grand scheme of things, it was 2 lap leaders. When we look at Richmond, a little bit spread out more, 2 main lap leaders, 2 secondary lap leaders, okay? And even we'll say 3 for Phoenix. We'll say 4 potential lap leaders for Richmond. However, all finish inside the top 10. They're all being here. They're not being wrecked out, which is another thing that's been interesting this year, is that the intermediate lap leaders have been running into a ton of issues. And I just cannot... I know the data's showing it's like, well, you just have to fade guys based on they're going to wreck out. The main lap leader's going to wreck out. It's hard for me to do that, man. But we're seeing it being backed up here at Martinsville, here at Richmond, and here at Phoenix, is that the main 2 lap leaders the main lap leaders are going to be in the top 10. They're going to finish in the top 10. So I don't necessarily just want to fade people. Maybe when we get to intermediates, maybe get more, liberal in terms of who were high on an ownership, or if this guy is projected lap leader, maybe we can consider building less lines with him, because we're seeing that, the main lap leaders are running into issues. However, at these flat tracks, certainly the short tracks, because look, come on, Gateway, if you're counting Phoenix, if NASCAR's going to be like, Phoenix is a mile track, but it really races like a short track. Same thing here at Gateway, okay? The main lap leaders we're going to see come from what I fully believe, come from inside the top 3 rows and then stay in there all day. Where does the secondary lap leader come from? Because I fully believe it is going to be the pole sitter leading the first part of the race. Maybe not necessarily the first stage, but at least leading 70 laps in the race. Where does the secondary lap leader come from? It comes from where these guys are fast on pit road. That's the main point of interest that we're looking at, and the main lineup construction that I want to go with. It's leading to pit road. And that's how I've approached all the short tracks this year. We've had good years with it. Martinsville was very kind to me. Just missed playing the optimal. Actually, I missed playing the optimal by 1 position at Martinsville. Finished tied for 2nd. At Richmond was just, I think, 8 points off the optimal with some of my highest lines. I just didn't have people like Blaney and even Kurt Busch to the extent I missed on them again. But the short tracks have been very, very kind, and this is the way that I've approached them this year. So when we're looking at Gateway, you know, and these are just early placeholder projections, not necessarily what we project them for, or not what Pearce is projecting for. This is just baseline, you know, it's already in there. Who are the guys that I'm liking here? It's the guys who have been up front in the other races, you know, and so I don't necessarily want to harp on the gigantic like 10K guys, but when we scroll down and really start looking towards the value plays, I'm afraid Kligerman qualifies better than what he should in this race. I don't mind. I mean, I love Todd Gilliland yet again. I don't know why everybody just died on the LaJoy train last weekend. You know, Gilliland, $4,900 should be the play in the 4K range here. You know, Haley, Custer, Austin Cindric. We've seen these guys have been fast on pit road, and certainly Cindric and Custer. We've seen that they've shown speed on pit road. They've shown that they can finish well on the short tracks. I like these guys in 6K range. I don't mind A.J. Allmendinger. He's not going to have any practice here because Rhodes is going to practice and qualify the truck and the car. He's going to go to the rear on Sunday. But I think A.J. Allmendinger has a real chance to show up and actually be there at the end in terms of being inside the top 20. So hopefully Ben Rhodes just qualifies the car 24th. I think A.J. Allmendinger would still be in play there. Eric Almirola, Chase Briscoe, they've shown speed on pit road. Blaney, Wallace, I'm liking these guys. Eric Jones, I want to try and primarily play him on the intermediate tracks here. I'm not necessarily sure what I want to do with Suarez right now. But yeah, like the main, you know, under, you know, 10K guys that stand out to me right now are Bubba Wallace, Eric Almirola, A.J. Allmendinger, Cindric, Cole Custer, Haley, and Todd Gilliland. That's where I'm at right now. Clearly, we can look at the practice data, and we can use the practice data and see where these guys are going to be, you know, where they are in terms of speed, and you can use that to make, you know, head-to-head driver choices when you're building your lines. But for me, Gateway is going to be a boring race, specifically following like the Snorefest at Texas, one of the best races we've seen in several years at Charlotte. Then we're going to Gateway, and it's going to be a snoozer. And so everybody who's complaining on Twitter or whatever about, oh, Gateway's boring and stuff, okay, that's fine. But for fantasy, I'm telling you, this has the opportunity to be a really good race for fantasy, just like Martinsville, just like Richmond. And Phoenix, I think in hindsight, if we would have been more aggressive on chasing pit road stuff, we may have been able to catch Briscoe. We may have been able to catch Reddick being up front in that race. So play the pit data. This is pit data week, okay? Pit data, pit data, pit data. That's what I want to die on. That's what I want to look at. If you want to dive into it on your own, or if you want to support Pearce and I, feel free to join the Patreon and link in the description below. But this is the early, you know, preview Thursday, you know, look at Gateway for the Cup Series. So yeah, pit data, pit data, pit data. I'm telling you, just let's trust the pit stops, because that's where the passes are going to be. Maybe we have a pass early in the run, but once it goes green, it's going to be on pit road. That's where the race is going to be decided. So we'll see you guys in the live shows later this week.